From the very beginning, I could feel it. The way Marina looked at me like I didn't belong. She never raised her voice, never caused a scene. But her silence? It could slice through a room. Her smiles were tight, controlled, more performance than warmth. I remember one night, she glanced at my dress and said, "So simple," like she was doing me a favor by pretending not to be disgusted. That was her specialty. Insults wrapped in pretty paper. Marina came from a family that wore reputation like armor. They loved to remind everyone where they came from. Me? I built everything I had with my own hands. No shortcuts, no handouts. I never asked Leo for a single thing, and yet she acted like I was draining him dry. No matter what I did, it wasn't enough. Her approval was this invisible crown, and I was never meant to wear it. So I smiled, nodded, kept my posture, even when her words dug into me like needles. Leo tried to help. He'd squeeze my hand under the table when she got sharp, tell me to ignore her. "She's just like that," he'd say. "Don't take it personally." And when I finally reached my limit, when I was ready to speak up for myself, he'd ask me to be the bigger person. Every single time, for the sake of peace, for family. And so I stayed quiet, bit my tongue. But patience, no matter how deep, eventually runs dry. What stung the most wasn't just her judgment, it was how subtle it all was. If she had yelled or been outright cruel, maybe others would have noticed. But no, Marina was calculated. She made her disapproval look like concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this kind of life?" she once asked me, in front of Leo, her voice all sugar. He didn't say anything. He just stared at his plate. And I remember thinking, if I cry now, she wins. So I didn't. Every holiday became a performance. I'd rehearse small talk like it was a script, compliment her roast, laugh at stories I'd heard a dozen times, pretend her cold glances didn't twist something inside me. I hated how much I cared. I hated that I still looked for some flicker of acceptance in her eyes. But most of all, I hated how alone I felt in those rooms. Like no matter how close I sat to Leo, I was always on the outside, smiling, nodding, shrinking. And yet, I stayed. For Leo. Because despite all of it, I loved him. And I knew he loved me. We built something real together, something solid. But even the strongest foundations can crack under enough pressure. I could feel it. The strain, the weight of every moment I let her diminish me. I told myself I was being strong, that swallowing the pain meant I was in control. But deep down, I knew better. I was bleeding silently, and one day I'd run out of bandages. I started noticing the little ways her words stayed with me, the hesitation before I spoke, the second guessing before I picked an outfit or offered an opinion in front of the family. It wasn't just her anymore. It was the version of me she'd planted in my own mind. The insecure one, the outsider, the woman who was never quite good enough. That's what Marina did best. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed to make you doubt yourself. There were nights I lay awake next to Leo, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I kept letting it slide. Why I let her write the story of who I was. But then I'd look at him, tired from work, always trying to keep peace between the two women he loved, and I'd push my anger down just a little deeper. I convinced myself it was noble, that one day, maybe, she'd come around, that if I just held on long enough, she'd see the real me. But I was wrong. The longer I waited, the more it festered, and something inside me, something I thought was just patience, began to shift. Because there's a fine line between being the bigger person and letting someone walk all over you. I didn't know it then, but the moment she crossed that final line, I wouldn't be silent. Not anymore. Rose had been patient for years, but even patience has a breaking point. That day was supposed to be beautiful. I remember checking my reflection in the mirror 3 times before we left, not out of vanity, but out of hope. I wanted everything to feel perfect. Leo held my hand the whole drive, his thumb brushing circles over my knuckles. We were buzzing with excitement, rehearsing how we'd tell her. I even imagined her reaction. Maybe a gasp, maybe tears. Maybe, just maybe, that wall between us would finally crack. We walked into her house like we were carrying treasure. Leo had this big smile on his face, proud, soft, the kind that only comes when you're dreaming out loud. I was quiet, but glowing. I thought if there was ever a moment she might see me differently, it would be now. A grandchild. Her first. I imagined her eyes lighting up, imagined her calling her friends to brag, imagined her hugging me, not tightly, but genuinely. But she didn't smile. She didn't tear up. She narrowed her eyes like we'd just delivered a threat instead of a blessing. "You trapped him," she hissed. Her voice, usually so polished, cracked into something cruel. "That's what this is. You got pregnant so he couldn't leave. You're nothing but a gold digger." I felt the words hit before I fully heard them. It was like the room tilted, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because she broke me, but because I wasn't going to cry. Leo froze beside me. I could feel his body tense, like he didn't know which fire to put out first, mine or hers. For a second I thought he might say something, anything. But all I heard was silence. The kind of silence that stretches forever and tells you everything you need to know. Marina stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I just stared at her, holding the weight of that moment in my chest like a stone. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to defend myself. Because deep down, something in me finally clicked. I saw her. Really saw her. Not as this intimidating matriarch, but as a bitter woman desperate to keep control. Her words didn't come from strength. They came from fear. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not mattering as much anymore. And instead of feeling broken, I felt awake. Like the fog I'd been living in for years had finally cleared. She thought calling me a gold digger would destroy me, that it would send me running out the door in shame. But what she didn't realize is that I'd spent too long building my worth to let it be shattered by someone who'd never taken the time to see it. Her accusation was loud. It echoed in that room like a slap. But what came next would be louder, not in volume, but in truth. And I was finally ready to be heard. After that moment, everything changed. Not on the outside, but in me. I stopped needing her to approve of me. I stopped hoping she'd soften. I realized I'd spent years letting her shape how I saw myself, letting her barbs seep into the way I measured my worth. But standing there with a child growing inside me, something shifted. I wasn't just someone's wife anymore. I was someone's mother, and I'd be damned if I let that baby grow up in the shadow of someone else's bitterness. Leo apologized on the drive home, over and over. I could see it in his face, the guilt, the confusion, the helplessness. But I didn't blame him. Not really. I knew what it was like to love someone and still feel caught in the middle. All I said was, "We're going to be fine." And I meant it. Because now I knew. I didn't have to fight for space in her world. I could build my own. But something kept nagging at me. That accusation, that cruel outburst, it wasn't random. It came from somewhere. And for the first time, I stopped reacting and started wondering. What made a woman say something like that to her own son's wife? What was she really afraid of? The answer I thought might be buried in her past. And once I started digging, I wouldn't stop. I didn't go into it looking for revenge. That's not who I am. But after everything Marina said, after how effortlessly she tried to rewrite who I was, I needed answers. Not for her, for me, for Leo, for the child we were bringing into this world. I couldn't shake the feeling that her hatred wasn't really about me. It was personal, yes, but rooted in something older, something she'd buried so deep she probably convinced herself it never happened. I just wanted to find the truth. So I started asking questions. Not directly, I wasn't ready for a war, but I reached out to a few of Leo's cousins, some older relatives who still sent polite cards at Christmas. I was careful. I played the curious daughter-in-law, and bit by bit, pieces started to fall into place. A story emerged. Not mine, but hers. One no one ever talked about. Marina wasn't always the picture of elegance and certainty. She hadn't always been sitting at the top of the table. She'd once been the girl who had nothing. No inheritance, no name, barely a home. She met Leo's father during a time when she had few options and even fewer people looking out for her. That part had been erased from the narrative she liked to tell, replaced with tales of courtship and shared ambition. But the real story? It was hidden in letters, old photos, whispers at family gatherings. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The woman who accused me of scheming had done the very same thing decades ago. I found an old photo album first, tucked away in one of the cousins' attics, covered in dust and almost forgotten. Inside, Marina looked different, softer, younger. Her smile wasn't polished yet, and the clothes she wore weren't designer. They were borrowed, faded, sometimes even frayed. And there, in the background of one picture, was Leo's father, standing in front of the old family estate, wearing a tailored coat while Marina stood beside him like a shadow. That image haunted me. It told a truth she never dared to speak. Then came the letters, handwritten, folded neatly into an old jewelry box. They weren't love letters, they were negotiations. Promises exchanged between Marina and Leo's grandmother. Talk of stability, of future guarantees. Words like agreement and arrangement floated between lines of carefully crafted sentences. There it was, the transactional roots of a marriage that had always been sold as a fairy tale. The woman who now called me a manipulator had once bartered her way into a family she had no claim to. Just like me. Only different. The final piece came from Leo himself. He'd always tiptoed around his parents' past, but after what happened, he started asking his own questions. One night, he handed me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a prenuptial agreement from decades ago. It wasn't just about money. It laid out expectations, conditions. If this was love, it came with terms and footnotes. And as I held that paper in my hands, I realized something sharp and undeniable. Marina hadn't hated me because I was a gold digger. She hated me because I reminded her of the version of herself she never wanted to face again. It's strange how we inherit silence. How whole families can build traditions out of what's never said. Marina had spent decades curating her version of the truth. Pearl necklaces, manicured dinners, a legacy rooted in elegance. But now I knew better. Her throne was built on compromise, on secrets dressed up as sacrifice. And what terrified her most wasn't losing control. It was having her past laid bare, stripped of the polish she'd spent a lifetime applying. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Like the fog around her finally lifted and revealed the woman underneath, one who had clawed her way into a different life, then spent the rest of her years pretending she hadn't. I didn't judge her for it. If anything, I understood. Survival makes us do things, but what I couldn't forgive was her hypocrisy. The way she looked at me with contempt for walking a road she once crawled. The way she made me feel small just to protect a lie. She wore pearls now, but her past was tied in rope. And I was done letting her use that rope to strangle my voice. I didn't need revenge. I needed reckoning. So when Leo and I sat down to plan the family dinner, the one she'd attend, the one where I'd toast the future, I knew exactly what I was going to say. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because truth deserves its seat at the table, too. The night of the dinner, the house buzzed with nervous energy. Leo was calm, but I could feel his pulse in every move he made, the way he smoothed the tablecloth twice, the way he checked the wine glasses like they might tell him how the night would end. I set the table like I was setting a stage. Each plate, each fork, each folded napkin. It all mattered. It wasn't about drama. It was about presence. I wasn't hiding in corners anymore. I was sitting at the head of my own story. The guests arrived in waves, cousins, aunts, an uncle who only showed up when food was involved. There was laughter, small talk, the clinking of glasses. Marina came last, of course, draped in elegance, chin slightly raised, eyes sweeping the room like a critic at a gallery. She smiled at everyone but me, and I let her. Because this time, I didn't need her approval. I had something stronger. Clarity. The kind that doesn't shake when someone else tries to rewrite the narrative. Dinner was served, conversation flowed, and when dessert was cleared, Leo tapped his glass gently, just enough to quiet the room. I stood beside him, my heart steady. I looked around at the faces, Some kind, some curious, some already bracing for whatever was about to unfold, and then I raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said. The words felt warm, true. But I wasn't just toasting the baby or the future. I was toasting the end of pretending. Marina raised her glass too, but her eyes never softened. She didn't know what was coming, not yet. I didn't speak with venom. There was no edge in my voice, just honesty. I turned toward her, not with a speech, but a question wrapped in calm. "Have you ever been judged for your past, Marina?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Because I have. Constantly. And mostly by you." The table stilled, forks lowered. Every breath felt like it was waiting for the next word. I could feel Leo beside me, not holding me back, but holding me up. He didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. This wasn't his story to tell. It was mine. So I continued. "You called me a gold digger. You said I trapped your son. But what I didn't realize is how familiar that story must have felt." Her lips parted, just slightly. I placed a folder on the table. Nothing dramatic, no theatrics. Inside was everything. The photos, the letters, the contract. Not to shame her, just to mirror her. "You judged me for something you once did," I said, voice steady. "The only difference is, I came into this family with love. You came with a plan." She didn't speak. No denial, no defense. Just silence, the kind that finally meant something. Around the table, faces shifted, some shocked, some solemn, some slowly nodding, as if they'd always suspected there was more to her story. But now, there it was, out in the open, undeniable. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. Marina looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Her hands, always so poised, now trembled slightly in her lap. I watched her face, searching for some flicker of humanity. Regret, relief, maybe even understanding. But what I saw was something else entirely. Fear. The kind that creeps in when the version of you you've spent years protecting finally starts to crack. She didn't deny it. And that said more than words ever could. I could have pushed further. I could have listed every moment she made me feel less than, every silent wound she left behind. But I didn't. Because I wasn't there to humiliate her. I was there to reclaim myself. To show that I saw her clearly now. Not as a monster, not as royalty, but as a woman with a history. A woman who, like me, made hard choices. The difference was, I never used mine to hurt someone else. As the dinner came to a quiet end, some relatives approached me with soft apologies. Some even thanked me. Others avoided my eyes, unsure what to say. But that didn't matter. I hadn't done it for them. I'd done it for my child, for Leo, for me. Marina left without a word, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. She had built her status on silence. But truth was louder than reputation. And finally, it had been heard. In the days after the dinner, the silence lingered. But this time, it didn't belong to me. Marina disappeared from the center of everything, like a curtain pulled back to reveal an empty stage. She didn't call. She didn't explain. And slowly, without needing a declaration, people started to see things differently. The woman they once deferred to without question suddenly seemed smaller. Not because of what she did back then, but because of how she treated me now. Some relatives kept their distance. Others sent texts or stopped by, awkward and unsure but kind in their own way. I didn't hold grudges, not with them. They hadn't known the full story. They only saw what she wanted them to see. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not her judgment, but how easily everyone accepted it. Until they couldn't anymore. Truth has a way of seeping through even the tightest lids. And once it's out, nothing fits the same again. Leo was quieter too, but different. He held me more, watched me more closely. I think part of him was grieving the image of his mother, realizing how much of her love had come with conditions. but he never pulled away. If anything, he moved closer. He called me strong one night, just as I was falling asleep. Not like a compliment, but like a confession. Like he was finally seeing everything I had carried, and maybe finally letting go of some of what he had. When our baby was born, everything else fell away. The hospital room was quiet, sterile, full of blinking monitors and that faint scent of antiseptic. But in my arms, life. Real, wrinkled, miraculous life. Leo cried before I did, and when they placed that tiny, warm body against my chest, I knew. This was the moment everything changed. This child would never grow up questioning their worth the way I had to. Not if I had anything to say about it. The messages from family came quickly. Congratulations, photos, emojis, and yes, one from Marina. It was brief, polite, a line or two about hoping we were well. No demand, no apology, just presence, hovering on the edges like a shadow unsure if it still had permission to exist. She asked if she could visit. I read the text twice, then looked at Leo. He didn't pressure me. He just waited. And for once, the choice was fully mine. So I said no, kindly, calmly, and without guilt. Not yet, I wrote. Respect is earned, not assumed by title, not even grandmother. I didn't need to punish her. I wasn't interested in revenge. I just wasn't going to hand over the most precious part of my life to someone who had never valued mine. And that felt more powerful than any outburst could have. It was quiet, but firm, like a door gently closing, with no intention of reopening until the knocking came with humility. Sometimes, people ask if we've reconciled, if things are better now. And I always answer the same way. We're at peace, just not the kind that requires pretending. Marina still lives her life, still plays her part in the family when it suits her. But we don't orbit around her anymore. We stopped chasing a version of love that came with disclaimers. What we have now is simple, honest, and ours. No more proving, no more shrinking, just us. There are days I catch Leo watching me with that quiet look, the one that says he sees everything differently now. The strength, the boundaries, the fire I'd kept tucked away for years just to keep the peace. And sometimes when I'm rocking our baby to sleep, I think about the story Marina tried to write about me. The one where I was calculated, opportunistic, a woman with interest, and I smile, because in the end, she wasn't entirely wrong. I did have an interest, in truth, in respect, in protecting what mattered. They tried to paint me as the one who came with motives, but the only thing I ever wanted was dignity. Mine, my husband's, and now, my child's. And somehow, through all the noise, that's exactly what I walked away with. They tried to paint me as the one with interest, but it was my dignity that gained value in the end.